Alright guys, so is this the best budget BB58 Homage you can get? That's the question we're going to try and answer in this review. So this is the Militado ML06. So quickly pop the watch to one side for a second, briefly show you the packaging in passing. So got the branding on the top there, and then that kind of fake carbon fibre look to it. And here's the actual watch. So there's actually a few different versions of this. The one I've got here is the all black one. Then they've got another one similar to this, which has got a red bezel, and then I think that's got gold around the indices and the hands, as opposed to the silver on this one. Then they've also got a vintage black one, I think it is, which has got a faux tina, and the indices are actually different on that one for another reason, which I'll talk about as we get into the review. But before we do that, and before we go into any more detail on the variations, first of all let's talk about the dimensions, because that's the same across all of them. So when it comes to the diameter, it's 38mm, but if you include the bezel, it's more like 38.7. Then we've got a thickness of 13.2, a lug width of 20, and then the all-important lug to lug is coming in at 46. So a nice compact lug to lug there. Then when it comes to the weight on the supplied bracelet, with all the links included, it's coming in at 147 grams, and then size for my 7-inch wrist, it's coming in at about 137. And it is an interesting bracelet, which we'll talk about in a second. But before we do that, first of all let's talk about the clasp. So the top of it is brushed, but when it comes to the side, that is actually polished. So we've got the fold over there, just open that up, and then it is a milled clasp. And then when it comes to the inside of it, I'll show you that now. So unfortunately we don't have on-the-fly adjustment on this, and we have got that inner micro adjust, which is a little bit fiddly to use, similar to Pagani's. So it would have been nice if they just gone with a standard one, with the adjustment on the outside, or as I say, even better, an on-the-fly adjustable one. But I can understand why they haven't given the price of the watch. Now moving on to the bracelet, and again this is quite interesting. If you haven't seen this before, it does have a different look to it. It's not a standard 3-piece, as those little end plate bits are actually separate pieces. And you can see we've got that rivet look to it, and those rivets aren't rivets, they're actually screws. Unfortunately with this one you do actually need 2 screwdrivers to be able to adjust it, so you'll need to use one either side, which can be a little bit fiddly, but thankfully you only have to do it the one time. So now let's move on to the head of the watch, talk about that. So you can see we've got an unsigned ground there, and it is a fully brushed case as well. The only bit that isn't brushed is those little polished chamfer details on the edge, and you can also see there we've got the female end links as well, which does help because it is a pretty flat case, not a lot of curvature there, which can be one of the negatives with these kind of style homages. So I do appreciate they've kept that look to look down to somewhat alleviate that issue. When it comes to the bezel, you can see we've got a nice polished detail on the coin edge of that, and we've also got that nice domed crystal as well. So it's a double domed crystal. We will be checking soon if it is sapphire crystal on there or not. But before we do that, first of all let's talk about the dial. So again, this is going to vary depending on which version you go for, but with this one we've got that nice glossy black dial. Again, if you go for the vintage one, I think that's a matte finish, and it might be like a grey kind of black, and I think that is the same for the one with the red bezel as well. And another big difference between this one and the one which has got the vintage kind of look to it, that one's actually got printed indices, whereas this one, and as far as I know, the red bezel version, both have applied indices. And this one, as you can see, has a nice silver surround on the hands and the indices, whereas the one with the red bezel I think has a gold kind of colour to it. And obviously the one with the printed indices doesn't have a surround on it at all, as well as having that faux tina. But we'll talk about that in a bit when we talk about the lume. So we've got nice proportions on all of the hands, no issues with any of them. And then when it comes to the branding, that's just printed, the Militado. I'd like to see them come out with some kind of logo. And then we've got the usual kind of text at the bottom, so the automatic and the fact that it's 200 meter water resistance. And then we've just got that printed minute track around the outside. So fairly clean dial, and I do like this glossy black dial. Definitely prefer it to the matte one I think. That's part of the reason I opted for this one. And as you guys know, I do really like a domed crystal, just a nice bit of distortion around the edge of the dial. But now let's check it and see if it is actually sapphire or not, using the trusty diamond selector 2. And yep, we have got sapphire crystal, so always good to see. So you won't need to worry about it getting scratched with it being a domed crystal. So now you're probably wondering, what movement have we got in this? You're probably thinking it's the NH35, and yep, you'd be correct. Which is a little bit disappointing because obviously we don't have a date on this, so we have actually got a ghost date position. So if we just unscrew the crown, which is quite thin, and does protrude out a little bit more than you'd think, but that is because the bezel does stick out a little bit beyond the case. So if we pull it out to the first position, and then you'll see we have actually got that ghost date I was talking about. So we have to pull it out to the second position, and then we can change the time. And you'll see as well the second under stopped, so we have got hacking. And if we push it back in again, that'll re-engage. Then we've got hand winding, all works well, no issues. And then screwing it back down, despite it being quite a thin crown, it's still pretty easy to use. It's not the most grippy, but it does the job. And now we're zoomed in, you can see it looks like it's not quite screwed in enough, but that is as far as it will go. And you can see why, as I said, with that bezel. If you had it any further in, it'd probably be touching that, which would obviously cause issues. So I can see why they've done it. So now let's talk about the bezel. So as I said, there's a couple of different versions. There's this one that I've got, and then there's also the red one, which is actually aluminium, but this one is actually ceramic. And it's actually 120 click as well. So I'll show you that in action now. So it's a pretty nice clicky action. And there's no backplay at all. It's a fairly tight bezel, but not overly so. As you can see, I'm not having any issues using it. And then when it comes to the alignment, if I get a zoom in, I'll show you that. That's bang on, no issues with that either. So overall, nice bezel. So now it's time to check out the lume. So again, this is where they vary depending on which version you go for. So if you go for the one with the photina, that actually uses C3. And I'll show you now what this one's like and what this is using. So you can see we've got a little bit there already, but let's charge it up, give it a proper chance. And there we go. So as you can see, this one is using that nice ice blue BGW9. And initially at least, we got a really good amount on there. I was actually surprised to see a fully loomed bezel. I was just expecting it to be the lume pip, to be honest. So that's a nice bonus. And we've also got a lume on that second hand as well. When it comes to the hands and the indices, we've got a pretty good amount of surface area to play with there. So I'm expecting pretty good things from that. The bezel, probably not so much, because there just isn't that much area to be working with to apply a lume. So now let's speed it up and find out if I'm right. So initially, not a great deal of change, as you'd expect, but the longer this goes on, you can see that bezel is beginning to fade pretty quickly already, which, again, you'd expect. In terms of the hands and the indices though, they're still looking pretty good. And when it comes to the bezel, that lume pip is actually still hanging in there too, so that is good to see, so you can still use that bezel. When it comes to the hands and the indices, the hour hand and the indices are still pretty good, although that minute hand does seem a little bit less bright than those two, probably because the amount of surface area, or lack thereof. It's still not terrible, but again, it is slightly less bright than them, so that's something to bear in mind. So, decent lume overall, but not the best. So you can probably see now, this isn't a perfect watch, and again, you probably wouldn't expect it to be given the price, but I think for the price they're asking for it, it's doing a pretty good job. Has it convinced you yet? Before you fully make up your mind though, I'll show you what it's like on wrist, and then we'll go over the pros and cons, so you can make a fully informed decision on whether you want to pick one of these up or not. So here it is on my 7-inch wrist, and I think it looks pretty good. And I do like that they opted to go for basically fully brushed, just with some polished little details. Just saves it getting scratched and fingerprinty, which you do get with watches that tend to have a lot of polishing. Female land links are also really appreciated as well. As I said, pretty flat case. And I do like the look of the rivet style bracelet, despite it being a bit fiddly with those double screws. But I'll be interested to know, is that a deal breaker for you right off the bat? I just think overall, it's a pretty smart looking piece. But there is one thing that I would like to see changed, and that is that clasp. Having the micro just on the inside is just fiddly and pretty awkward, so either just go with a standard clasp that's got the micro just on the outside, or even better, try and get an on-the-fly adjustable one, just to take the watch to another level. The same could be said for the movement, with it being the NH35 and not having a date on the actual dial. You've got that ghost date, so they could have used the NH38, the no date specific version. I don't mind that too much personally, but I know some people do get a little bit iffy about that and don't really like it. So that's pretty much it for the issues. For me personally, it is mainly just down to that clasp. Yeah, the double screw thing is annoying, but again, you only have to do it once, so I can get past that. And again, for me personally, the movement, I don't find that big a deal either. The only other minor thing I guess you could talk about is the lume maybe. Obviously it's going to vary, but with this particular one I have with the BGW9, just prefer I think if they just use the lume on the lume pip on the bezel, not bothered with the rest because it fades pretty quickly, and perhaps just add a touch more on that minute hand if you can. But as I say, that's pretty minor. So the question I asked at the beginning, is this the best budget BB58 Homage? Yeah, I think it is, especially if you use that discount code to get the price down even more. I think it's a great all-rounder. It doesn't really shine particularly in any one area, but it doesn't have any standout negatives like some other brands do, with the likes of Pagani Design with their really bad lume. This doesn't have that. So if you're still interested in picking one up, link is down in the description as always. That is an affiliate link, it does help support the channel, but you don't pay any extra. But if this isn't doing it for you, and you want to check out some other watches from Militado, I've got a few others I've reviewed, some of which I've got down here. So I'll leave links to the playlist up in the top, so you can check all them out. And I'll also leave it down in the description as well. But that's it for this one guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.